Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. Much appreciated. It's good to see new faces, old faces, young faces. This is all encouraging. We like to see people taking to the bass, whether it's upright or electric. The reason we're doing all this is to build community, to give everyone, the broadest exposure to the bass world and the bass players that are so much a part of this world. And then, it's vendors here that help support the players, and a lot of us are, started off as players and kind of went a little different direction to, chase our passions, and because, we just kind of got pulled in that direction, and that's what happened to me. I started off as a bass player and started playing in bands and things like that. Started to work on my own instrument. I started off with an imitation Hofner Beetle bass when I started playing back when I was 16 years old. That's when I first started playing electric. And, it was cheap instruments, so things started to kind of vibrate apart and things, and I started fixing it myself, and just kind of learned the ins and outs of that funny little bass that I had, and decided one day that I wanted to try to build an instrument of my own, and so that's what I did. And I didn't have any previous woodworking skills. I just kind of was always sort of good with my hands, and I had some, intuition into how things were done, and started one summer with a couple pieces of wood, and my dad's friend had worked at a lumber, like a cabinet shop, and he brought home some wood, and I traced out shapes and stuff that I wanted, and kind of worked from there. I started off at a time when there weren't any books on building instruments, and other than violins and classical instruments. So anyway, I just started off that way, and eventually got fairly competent at building an instrument, and ran into I was playing in a fairly popular Buffalo-based band, and ran into another bass player hanging out one night, and we started talking, and long story short, I fixed his instrument, and it was an old P bass, and it was buzzing, and I had to file the frets and gave it back to him a couple days later, and he said, "Man, this is amazing. As I've taken it to everybody in the city, nobody's been able to fix this thing," and he says, "This is great. You ought to really do this for a living." And I went, "Yeah, sure." Not really. And I just kind of went on my merry way, and then the word got out that I fixed Rick's bass, and somebody called and said, "Hey, you fixed Rick. Rick gave me your number." And anyway, word of mouth, that happened. It got into repairs, and then worked on instruments for players that were coming through Buffalo, from REM to a number of different players, Genesis and so forth. And I learned a lot repairing instruments, the ins and outs, the high points and low points of a lot of instruments. And I did guitars, basses, anything that had strings, and decided that I wanted to build an instrument of my own that was going to really eliminate a lot of the problems that touring musicians were having. And so I studied composites when I was in college, and just sort of set on a path. Another company called Modulus was doing composites. Steinberger was doing graphite and so forth. And so I kind of got involved in that whole era of graphite and so forth. And came up with my own design, and players seemed to like it. And so one of the first artists that we had on board was Rick James, if you've ever heard of Rick James. He's no longer with us, crazy dude. But you know, we sort of got exposure from that, and I was encouraged at one of the first NAMM shows that I went to. I was encouraged to carry on, and had a lot of buzz about my instruments, and so I just kind of, you know, I drank the Kool-Aid. I got the, and so here I am today doing this, and I'm surrounded by, you know, some really, really fine players, some of the best players in the world here, and who have not only been artists, but friends of mine, consultants on various projects, and we've worked together on instruments for each of them, and I'm really proud and honored to be associated with these guys. They're really phenomenal players, and some of the best players that you folks will ever encounter in your life. So I'm really happy to be here. Just really quick about our instruments, and then I can talk about, you know, what we've kind of done together. So the instruments that I build are mainly have composite necks, and the feature with the composite neck is that it's impervious to changes in moisture and temperature. So basically what happens is the neck is really stable. Unlike a wood neck, you have to adjust it seasonally and so forth. And sometimes you have to adjust it when you're going from one side of the country to the other. If you're touring, that's a real problem. If you're not touring, it's a problem, because one day you pick up your bass and it's like, oh, the frets are buzzing. So you got to adjust the neck. Or sometimes you pick up your bass and it's, oh, the action, I could sling arrows off of it. It's so high. Mm-hmm. So you kind of, that's just the nature of wood, just it's the way it is. The composite is stable. It doesn't do that. It just stays in one place, and basically the way that it is the way that it stays. And the other feature about with a composite neck that's beneficial to players is that the notes are very even across the fingerboard, from string to string, from note to note, in both sustain and volume. So it records wonderfully. You don't have to change, you know, finger positions to work around certain passages, because you have what's called dead notes. That's where a note on the fingerboard will resonate in the same frequency that the neck, and they kind of cancel out. So it's very live, very expressive, and I think is, you know, one of the key factors that makes our instruments, you know, unique. Everything is handcrafted here in Northern California. We've recently moved over to Livermore. We were based in Redwood City for 17 years, and we're now located in Livermore. And I do a lot of the work myself with my staff, so I'm not sitting behind a desk, you know, pushing paper or pencil or whatever. I got to be in the shop and get my hands dirty and stuff. Otherwise, I don't feel like I'm living. I source.
These people to commission the bass from you?
I'm sorry?
Who was the first guys of these people sitting next to you to?
Oh, well, Michael and I go back.
Early Paleozoic.
Yes, yeah, when the dinosaurs roamed, yeah. In fact, Michael's bass is now, what, 25 years old?
It must be, yeah. More than that.
I don't know, well, 92.
Was it
When we
92?
finished up, yeah, 92. I can't do the math without taking my shoes off, but yeah. Yeah, that was the first one. And that was an interesting story. Well, I guess let's just get into it since you asked. And just kind of do this if I'm, you know, nearing the end. Oh, okay. So, yeah, so Michael and I have slightly different versions of this story, so I'll tell mine first. So I was given copies. When I lived on the East Coast, I was being sent copies, Windham Hill recordings of Michael's work. And I was really captivated by his music and his compositions, and I just really enjoyed what he was doing, and I really didn't really pay that much attention to the bass playing, because the compositions were so strong, and there was so much emotion and passion and everything in his work. And so I came out here and got to see Michael in concert and was really blown away because unlike his recordings, I mean, there was this guy that was just a monster on bass. I was like, wow. And so it was at Great American Music Hall, and I remember Michael playing, I think it was a PRS bass at the time, and so he was doing his usual, he's got a good gig doing stand-up as well. And so he's, to entertain people while he's retuning, he's telling jokes and, you know, this kind of deal. And I'm thinking of all the stuff that I'm watching him play and tune and all this, and I'm thinking of a zillion different ways that I could improve his life, change his life. And so the person that I knew at Windham Hill, after that was done, I moved back. I eventually moved out here, and when I did, I called my friend at Windham Hill, and I said, "You got to get me to meet Michael." And you know, and she said, yeah. And about 3 months went by, and I kept badgering her. She finally kind of just like, "All right, I'll do it." So she got in touch with Michael, and I went over to see Michael with the bass, and we met, and you know, Michael played the bass, and he had some stuff going on. He was a little preoccupied with something else, and I kind of admittedly walked away with sort of my tail between my legs going, oh man, I thought I was going to really impress this guy. And so about, I don't know, 3 weeks later, a month later, whatever, I don't know, Michael calls me up and says, hey man, you know, I've got this gig coming up, and my bass broke, and can you fix it for me? So I said, yeah, and you know, I'm easy. And so he brought his music band down, and had an electronics problem, and we couldn't do anything with it at the time. So I said, hey, you know, he said, well, I need a bass for my gig. And I said, well, you can borrow one of mine. It was the one, in fact, it's that one right there. And so he took it, and I called him back like a week later after I got his music man fixed, and I said, it's done. And he came in, picked it up, and he said, so, you want to build a bass for me, huh? And I said, yeah. He said, well, you know, I'm pretty crazy. I've got some crazy ideas, and you know, I've had conversations with builders before, and they ran out the room screaming. And so that was the start of a, as they say, a beautiful relationship. I don't know who was the crazier of the two, because we put this bass together, and we just started trading ideas, and you know, almost a little bit of a one-upsmanship in there. It's like, well, yeah, well, you wouldn't do that? Well, how about this? And so the hyperbass was born, and it was great because I knew we had something really special going on. Not only in the fact that the bass was so unique, but you know, Michael would stop by the shop every so often to check in and how it was going, and even in its just like, I had the neck on. I call him, say, hey, the neck is on. You want to come by and check it out for the fields one day? And we'd string it up just to kind of get a feel for things, and he's already kind of making music on this thing. I was like, it's not even, you know, it started to gel. It was just, it's one of those things where you had to be there. It was really magical. And yeah, he's got, yeah. And so, oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, let's, why don't we get some people in this?
Sure.
Get some things plugged in, get Tina going,
Okay.
and start talking about that bass and the, you know, what's special about that, and come on up. See if we can ease this into some, talk about that instrumental, about it.
Yeah, pull up a cab and sit down.
Come sit next to you, buddy.
Sure. So just to continue on while they're arranging things, I'll fast forward on this because I want to talk about Cody and Billy and, you know, some of the other guys. So yeah, we had to. The day came where the bass was being finished, and we were running late for a bass player magazine interview, and so we ended up hopping in a car, and Michael got in the back seat, And basically, we tacked the thing together, and I figured, well, the best we're going to do is just kind of show it to these guys and kind of explain what it does, and if we can get away with that, we'll be fine. And so in the, whatever, 20 or 30 minutes it took for us to drive down to Campbell, Michael had already not only got the bass roughed out for a setup, but he had already started working on a little bit of a ditty to play for these guys at Bass Player Magazine. So by the time we got there, it was a thing where they sat down and Michael started talking about, you know, the bass, and I started talking about the bass, and the editors and the magazine were there and so forth, and he managed to get everybody from the building, the guitar player guys, the keyboard player guys, the drum guys, everybody was crowded in the offices of Bass Player Magazine, listening to Michael play on this crazy bass. And so that's what it is. And I think he's gonna demonstrate the craziness.
Let me make sure I got that.
Yeah. So I'll explain a little bit. What happens is, so this bass is designed specifically for altered tuning, and I'm going to let Michael explain that to you because he's way better at it than I am. But it's also strung with piccolo strings, which means that they're thinner strings, and it's generally tuned an octave above a normal bass. The idea is that you can play this bass and change the tunings while you're playing it, either via the hip shot tuners that he's got there, or the bridge. There's two levers on the bridge. So I think Michael calculated there's about 10,000 possible tunings on this bass, about 50 of them, which he has under his belt. And yeah, and so unlike anything else that any other bass, like I say, you can actually change the tuning and make it part of the song that you've created. So it works really well, and gives that sort of unique feature. So there isn't any really fixed tuning on this. It's not like, normal bass EADG. It's whatever you want, and that opens up a whole bunch of possibilities that you could do that with your bass. You could just put piccolo strings on and do altered tunings, but you can't do them on the fly like you can with this. So, gee, Bill, you and I go back almost as much.
1993?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, a mutual friend of ours, a guy named Joe Gore, introduced us. Yeah. And,
Well, I had a bass that I always played. It was kind of like, I just loved it, and I really was kind of pretty much happy with it. But, one thing that's really bothered me is, like, if we played in a sweaty club, like, it just felt totally different. And so some nights I'd have great nights, and it felt great. Some nights it was just like, it never felt good, and I would always play a whole show and be mad afterwards because I was just fighting it the whole time. And I met him at an AM show, right? That's where we met.
yeah.
And he's
at
like,
a bar.
I can make a bass for you. And I was like, I like my bass. And he goes, I'm going to make a bass for you. You're going to like it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't think so, but
Yeah, that's right.
give me
that's
what you
right.
got. But
Yeah.
I like my bass.
Yeah.
And he gave me a bass. He goes, try it. Take it on tour. Try it. Tell me what you think. And I was like, okay, I got to play that something. But I like my bass. I want to play tonight with my bass. And like, I don't know, 3 or 4 nights into the tour, I broke a string. And it's like, I got to use the other bass. So I just picked that one up. And it was like, oh. And I played one song, and I was like, okay, I think this is my bass now. And the funny thing is, that was in like 1993, and that I still use that exact bass. It's that's my bass. Ever since that day,
Yeah.
I've never had another one.
Yeah,
I mean, it's my main thing.
Yeah.
It's just like, it fit every night. It was exactly how I wanted it to be, and it was exactly what I want. Pretty amazing, actually.
Yeah, and it was great working with Bill, too. We've been working on stuff over the years. We have a signature model instrument, the Bill Gold signature model instrument, which is modeled after his original instrument with a few improvements. Bill worked, well, we actually have a special circuit in that bass, which replicates Bill's signature sound, and it's an awesome sounding instrument. It's got that edge to it that only Bill's bass has, and you know it. You listen to it and you go, "That's it." It isn't a signature instrument for the sake of just putting his name on it. It's really it's a uniquely sounding instrument. You can spot it like right away, and anybody who hears it goes, "Oh, that's Bill's sound." It's just instantaneous. So. Yeah, that's been a lot of fun, and that's been a nice. It's been a nice success for us.
How do you and Cody meet?
That's a way different story. Well, that's his Sonus Special, and what happened is one of my guys was. On a bus at the NAMM show and spotted Cody on the bus. Nobody knew who Cody was. I mean, well, we didn't know who Cody was, let's put it that way. And, but this guy on the bus had a Zon gig bag, and Chris, the guy that worked for me, says, "Hey man, what Zon bass do you have?" Now, this is what I was told. Cody could tell you because he was there, I wasn't. And he said, what's on, what do you got, what Zon bass do you have? And Cody reportedly said, "Oh, it's not a Zon bass, it's a Ken Smith." And Chris says, "What are you doing with a Ken Smith and a Zon gig bag?" And I think Cody said, "Well, I don't know, it's just the way it came. Well, you got to come to the Zon booth and check out the basses, forget the Ken Smith." And Cody came over and played, and we all went, okay. And we hit it off. It was a good vibe, and Cody got on board, and it's been like that ever since. And the thing that's so cool for me is that we don't have any contracts. There's no agreements. Nobody had to we didn't have to cut our fingers and do the blood thing. This is all just mutual respect and just having a great relationship and good working. We support each other. I'm just really honored to, have that kind of a gentleman's agreement on things. It's been very cool, and especially with Michael and Bill for that long. I mean, they've been great supporting artists, and it's a unique situation for me. And you know, we're on that same track with Cody and Jeff Denson as well. Most of our artists, we just don't have any contracts with them. But so Cody got onto that bass, and he's been with us, I don't know, since what, 15?
Yeah.
Yeah, 2014, yeah.
2014.
And, you know, Cody's unique style has really put a new interest in our bass on the part of some players who like to play with picks and into the funk groove thing. And so this is just one of several basses that Cody has, but this is his baby. It's his main axe.
Yeah.
You just kind of get the team in and like talk about like what is it about that bass and your rigs that you guys have found like kind of you have a lot of tonal possibilities on
Yeah.
with your pickups, and I know that your amp is part of that rig, of course.
Sure.
And you know, you guys all have different experiences of how you match those two.
Yeah, well, I think for your basses, like you were saying, there's a lot of clarity, there's a lot of
Yeah.
detail, and then with Cody's attack in particular, there's a lot of snap with just the pick attack, and you get a lot of dynamics and variation, but you combine the materials of the basses and the attack, and it's
Yeah.
it's a recipe for snap. It's a recipe for, you know, real detail.
Well, you know, some people have asked me, I've had discussions, and people have asked me, so a choice between an amp or a bass, what do I buy? And the thing is that, and this has got nothing to do with, you know, what we're
I think
talking
we're
about
gonna
here.
agree. We're
But
gonna agree.
you know what? You can't make a lousy bass sound good, no matter how much amplification you have. You know, you've got to start. This is the source right here, and it's got to sound good, not only electronically but acoustically as well, because all this is just reproducing what's going on here. This is an acoustic instrument. It's a solid body, but it's got acoustics to it. And all the string vibration, the body vibration, all this plays into it. And this is just merely reproducing what's going on here. So if you've got a good sounding performing instrument, it's going to sound like $1 million through a good amplifier, because that amplifier is just going to reproduce every nuance of this instrument and not hold it back. So, you know, it's just like anything else. You get a great bass, and then you get a great amplifier, and then you're set. You've got maximum flexibility, versatility. You can play any gig, any type of music, and you'll have just a whole range of sounds to work with, so you can fit into any situation.
Can I jump in
Yeah.
here along those lines? This is not a Zon, but I do love it. We're going to talk later. Hopefully.
Okay.
This has turned into something that I totally love. I mean, this is a made in Indonesia Ibanez bass. When I first got it, it was nothing like it is now. So it's just to say that you can upgrade your instrument. I've tried 3 different pickups, settled on these. You know, these were not cheap, because you should probably notice this is a 6-string, but it has real narrow spacing. That was why I bought it. Basically,
Nordstrands?
What's that?
Are those Nordstrands or Aguilars?
These are Nordstrands.
Yeah, Nordstrands. Yeah.
So
Okay.
there's a model of this bass, which I actually ended up buying because I found one used that was about $5,300 new. It was made in Japan. It was almost identical, a little bit different pickups, same preamp. I got it to my house. I played 3 notes. I was like, oh my God, this one's better. This one's way better. So like I've changed the pickups. I've changed the preamp. This has become custom with like, you know, pull passive mode. Active mode means you have a battery in it. Gives you more tonal flexibility with, you know, bass, mid-range, and treble most commonly. Sometimes, like he has a switch on his bass, you can change the mid-range frequency. So all of these things can be used to change the tone, but it's not going to fix a bad tone. So I will say that like changing out the pickups was a huge upgrade. I even changed the nut on this. You see how I moved the strings down a little bit. just to make it a little bit easier reach down here to the low C. Regular bass is these 4 in the middle. You got a higher C and a lower B. When we took this nut off, it was a hollow piece of plastic, and then this is like an antique water buffalo bone or something. And I'm telling you, even just changing this nut made this sound from a like $1,500 bass to like a $2,500 bass. I don't know how. It got richer, more defined. The lows and the highs were better, all across the instrument, not just the open string. I do have one little detuner. I don't have 4, but you know. So there's some good things. You can find a design that's close to what you want. Like basically, I've struggled my whole life with finding a 6-string that wasn't too wide, because I enjoy playing chords more across the neck versus like tapping and harmonics and stuff. It's just a different style. But having more strings allowed me to do that.
There's EQ and amp issues that you encounter with that style of playing,
Right.
that I think it'd be good to talk about. Like, what
Yeah,
is
so
it
anyway,
that-
you can't upgrade your bass, and it's cheaper than buying a new bass. But having said that, if I could do it all over again, I might just go for a custom build, because, I mean, I absolutely love this thing. But, you know, there's always a new toy you want to try. But I've found something close now, really close.
And I'd like to dovetail on what you were saying about the bass being the important aspect. I would say maybe mostly because it's so tactile.
Yeah.
That's the thing you put your hands on no matter if there's an amp or not. And that's why it's really important to make an investment in a bass that when you hold it and you hit a note and the note rings, my early guitar teacher always told me, it's like, if you put it on your lap, if you hold it against your body and you feel it, that's probably a good one. That's probably one to go with. So that's maybe one of the other reasons why your point about, you know, getting a good bass is that's where you spend the vast majority of your time, regardless if you're playing loud, quiet, any of that stuff. So it's, and you see it in these stories here, you know, you've got this bass from '93. There's a lot of history there and a lot of connecting with it, and that's kind of what you hope for, is that you find that instrument, and you'll collect more as you go along as well. But yeah, you find that instrument that you just resonate with, and a lot of other things line up. Yeah, I would also say, from an amplifier standpoint, at that point, one of the things that we think about a lot at Mesa Boogie when it comes to designing amplifiers is to essentially get out of the way of that and to try and be neutral and or flat, some people would say, although that's a strange term when you're talking about things that you're trying to be inspired by your tone. But we try and make it so that when we plug different instruments into an amplifier, we hear the instrument, and then you get frequency control over the instrument. And I think we're probably going to end up talking a lot about that as we go here, as you talk about gigging and rooms and frequency response and all of that. But you know, some amplifiers have voices similar to the way that a bass has a voice because of the pickups. If you got a P bass pickup or a J, or you know, humbucking or any of that. And our amps, even though we're leaning toward neutral, our amps definitely have a little bit of a voice as well.
Yeah, and I think it might be good to just like explain a couple terms of what P, J, and humbucking pickups are for a lot of people who are coming from an acoustic bass standpoint. You guys have some of these examples. I don't think there's a P bass setup in,
But the jazz bass is right
You
there.
want me to grab that?
but the split coils, or you know what those constructions are.
So if you want to talk about that, you probably have a little more overall knowledge.
I've got bass with the single coil on the humbucker.
That's just yet another variation. So this is one of them. Sire bass. Thank you, sir. It's Daryl's bass. These guys here, this is a jazz bass. Not a Fender jazz bass, it's a Sire jazz bass, but jazz bass has got this body style. And generally these pickups, this is the look of a jazz bass. And so these are single coil pickups. And what happens, so this is the look of, if anybody says J-bass pickups, single coil pickups, this is generally what they're referring to. And so what happens is that there's just one coil, there's a bobbin and one coil of wire around this bobbin, and these are the magnets. And that constitutes one pickup. So you've got a neck pickup and a bridge pickup. And single coil pickups sound unique unto themselves. They tend to have more detail in the high end. They've got an interesting growl and mid-range characteristic. This sound is highly sought after because it cuts in the mix very well. It records well. People, prefer that sound. There's another version, and this was originated by Fender. Leo started this back in, was it 64? I think it was the first jazz bass. I don't know my Fender history.
I think it was 63.
Yeah, 62s, yeah, okay, so, yeah, okay. Well, anyway, early 60s, let's just put it that way. The P-bass has got two coils, and they're offset. They don't look anything like this. They're not this long piece, but if you cut this in half and split them over like this, that's kind of what it looks like. And that's what's called a split coil design. And basically, what that means is they basically took one of these coils and one of these coils, and they offset them and they wired them in series so that they're noise-free, so they're humbucking. And so that's the pickup that you'll find on the Precision. You'll also find it on basses. We build them as well. What they call PJ, Precision Pickup, Jazz Bass Pickup, and you get an interesting combination. The split humbucker is a fatter, deeper sounding pickup.
Is there a way we can put things in, like give an example of this is what the single and double coil sounds like?
We don't, okay, so what we can do is, Michael's bass has got the ability to split between coils. He's got what we call soap bar pickups. I know this is a lot to kind of, it's not as difficult as I'm making it sound.
These things are kind of fatter.
Yeah, like a bar of soap. And so what happens is, you can, in a soap bar, there's generally two coils under the cover. And basically they take two of these, stick them together, and they put them under one cover. And a soap bar lends itself to a lot of different coil combinations. You can do all sorts of things with that. One of the things you can do with the soap bar in having two coils is that you can switch between two coils and one coil. So you can have that single coil sound, you can have that jazz bass kind of sound out of the pickup, or you can have that P-bass kind of sound. So obviously the P-bass, it being a dual, two coils together, is going to be bigger and fatter. The single coil is going to sound thinner. And Michael will demonstrate that for you.
So this is single coil? And then this is this pickup, which is a humbucking pickup, two coils.
So what's happening is the neck pickup is going to be fatter, is going to be bigger sounding, more muscle to it, where the bridge pickup is going to be more articulate, more punchy, so more focused. And that's the difference in the sound between the two pickups essentially.
And then between those sounds, maybe it'd be good to talk about you guys, like how you guys use your amp to exploit those things, and how you use those in different settings. Like, I mean, Bill's playing different halls than Cody and Jeff and everybody. It'd be nice to check in. Like, how does your amp help in those situations get your bass?
Let me just say one thing before we leave the topic of pickups, and that is placement. Okay, you'll notice that the pickups on Cody's bass are in a different place than they are on this bass, or his bass, or any of the others. Pickup placement's got a lot to do with the tone of the instrument. And I don't have Bill's bass here, but there's different things going on. So with Cody's bass, we moved the neck pickup back towards the bridge, and that gives it more focus, more articulation. And in the case of, and so you can see, if you move this pickup closer to the neck, you'll get a deeper sounding pickup, because you're getting more bass content being picked up by the pickup. In the case of Bill's bass, we did something similar to what Cody's got here, but his bass has got a dual coil pickup in here and a single coil pickup here, and that dual coil is one of those split coil pickups that I was talking about, and the combination of those two gives his bass a certain mid-range characteristic that only that combination can give you. So what I'm saying is that you've got a difference in the pickup styles. So you've got single coil, dual coil. You've got pickup placements, so where the pickups are positioned, that makes a difference in the sound. And then to take it one step further, which I won't go into because there's not enough time to talk about it, is pickup windings. You can vary the sound of the pickup by the amount of turns of wire, the type of magnet, so on and so forth. There's a whole science to that as well. So I'll hand it over to you.
It's so vast, and it just keeps going. Did you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, I could jump in and just, demonstrate a little bit. Like, this is all neck pickups. I blend all neck. You hear Now, if I went to all back. It's kind of more punchy, and then that was this pickup. I switched over, and then here. And that's basically totally flat on the instrument. So then if this is active, so there is a slight buffering. That just means it does have a little bit of influence on the sound. It helps a longer cable, drive effects, and stuff like that. But then if you go into passive mode, notice, back to active. It's a little bit brighter in active mode. But then a lot of these basses also have a tone knob where you can roll this back. So I can get Motown with this front pickup, passive, tone roll up. So there's a lot you can do, and actually this took months to get this knob working right. Like I said, if I had to do it again, I don't know if I'd go for it. But same thing here, like you could go for a bridge pickup. This is and then if you go back to bring the tone knob back up. Actually, I'm still on neck, sorry. It's a little bit more nasal, a little more focused, which I don't personally go all the way to the bridge. Say I want something more. Et cetera, or that's the bridge, but somewhere in the middle is awesome. You hear a little bit of that roundness and clarity, but still some of the punch, so there's a lot of combinations, it's fun stuff. Get yourself some good pickups or a good bass. If you buy one of his basses, it comes with good pickups. You got to do some work to get one of these.
Go ahead, you were saying.
Well, we're kind of doing the signal chain here. We're starting with pickups. One of the things I'm curious about is how many people here play electric? Show of hands. And then how many play an upright? Okay. How many playing both? Nice, nice. Okay. Kind of the same subject, kind of different. there's there's a lot of different approaches for each one, and there's certain things that you want to focus on if you're trying to amplify an upright bass versus an electric bass. I think maybe in some ways electric bass is probably a little bit easier because there's so much resonance that happens in the instrument itself. In some ways, you're trying to amplify the sound while controlling frequencies that can run away. So if that's the case, you're actually looking at your amplification, and particularly your EQ, differently, because if you're trying to amplify an upright bass, you're probably trying to figure out what frequencies are resonating in the instrument itself and how to get rid of some of those while still getting your volume to where you want it. With an electric bass, a lot of times you're trying to make it, like I call amplifiers make loud devices, and so you're trying to turn it up and trying to make it loud. And with an electric bass, you can get away with sort of boosting more frequencies on your amplifier, I think, than with it's a different way of looking at it. So we'll try and cover both, and I think also there are different amplifier systems that are better for upright these days than electric basses. And there's a lot of evolution in amplification right now. There's a lot of new technologies that are making a big difference, and they're taking rigs that were formerly this big and making them now this big, and you get almost an equivalent kind of volume, let's say. We could have a discussion about the tone maybe being a little bit different, of course, but it's kind of an amazing time to be a bass player as far as amplification is concerned. There weren't as many choices, and a lot of what you got were big sort of refrigerator-sized rigs that, you could argue over whether or not the drummer had it worse than you if he had more stuff to pack up than the bass player, because in order to make a big bass sound, you had to bring a lot of cabinet and you had to bring a lot of wattage to kind of, especially, if you got a big, loud drummer, you're trying to keep up, you're trying to come up with enough volume. So these days, a lot of that has changed, and the technology has made everything shrink, and I guess I would say you can kind of get away with bringing less, but if you're the kind of bass player that wants to be clearly heard, there's so many different ways to approach it. Sometimes, Bill, you go out and it's big. And then other bass situations, Jeff, or anybody coming in with an upright, there's a lot of places where you need to be subtle. So it runs a full gambit of depends on your style of music. There's so many different directions we can go. We can talk about cabinetry, we can talk about power.
Can I jump in just for a second about
Yeah.
cabs? One thing about cabinets and doubling, for you doublers that play both instruments, I found that usually your desires for amplification run a bit contrary for each instrument. For the electric bass, you tend to want a big bottom and maybe a ported cabinet. Ported means there's a hole in there that allows more low end to resonate through the box. And that gives you a deeper low end, generally, depending on the side. But all else being equal, that's going to give you a deeper low end. There's front ported cabs that'll really throw out lots of low end in front of you. There's also rear ported cabs where the hole is in the back. And they'll respond similarly if there's a wall behind, but if there's no wall, it won't make as much difference. It'll still have more low end. But like outdoors, huge gigs, it's most likely going to be a front ported rig. Or maybe, and then the other one is a sealed cabinet. Let me back up for a second. So the electric, you want the bigger bottom, but often on the upright, those ports make it just run away. Like I was using, won't say what it was, but it was an amp with a front port, and on my electric, it was awesome. On my upright, it would start moving the box. I'd get this early feedback. It was frustrating. Messing with EQ, cutting the 40 hertz, all this stuff. I didn't really explore much with rear ported cabinets, but then I ended up buying a sealed cabinet. That means there's no ports. Tends to have not quite as much low end, but with good speaker design and a big enough box. And this actually has 3 10s in it. There's one in the back that I feel helps fill out the low end. And for me, that's the one that works the best for both instruments. because the low end is more controlled. It's not making my upright resonate like crazy and just have carried away feedback. But yet it still has enough bottom for this. So it's a bit of a compromise, but I have to say, after all these years, I'm really, really happy with the sealed design as a doubler. Now, if you're just going to do one or the other, you might be just fine with a ported cab, and you'll love that extra low end. And but it's not. It depends on the size of the box. Like Michael's cabinet right there, I've tried that thing with upright, and it's awesome. It sounds great. That's a rear ported, that little box. So it's also the size of the resonating box, the port. There's a lot of stuff to it.
There is.
Why don't I get out of your way and you can talk about speaker cabinets and Mesa design and stuff.
Yeah.
Bill, you just about to say something, right?
I was just going to say one thing. I was saying before about having their philosophy about having their amplifiers not get in the way of the guitar. Think about how much time we've spent just describing where to put what kind of pickups you can have, where to put them, to be active, passive. Like there's so many decisions you make to get the sound that finally makes you happy. And there's so many times I've played amplifiers where it just sounds like the amplifier. So all that part of the guitar is just gone that you spent so much time thinking about what felt good for you. So I thought that was really, really good comment, actually.
And there's, just like instruments sound different, just like pickups sound different, people over the years have created amplifiers so that they sound different, whatever the taste was. Ampeg being great for rock, and lots of other people use Ampeg stuff for other types of music, although a lot of people use Ampeg for rock music. So for us, I think it was just a matter of looking around and seeing, this is, working for these genres or these styles, and this does this and seems to work well for these people playing. And we saw an opportunity. Mesa Boogie likes to think of itself as being high fidelity, very crisp and very clear and detailed, but as far as bass is concerned, especially over the last 10 years, what we saw was to, like I really said, just to try and be out of the way and let people's instruments speak and give them controls over frequencies that work well and that are intuitive for when you're in a gig situation or you're in a studio situation and you're trying to get a sound and you don't feel like you have to turn knobs everywhere. You want to be able to kind of get there quickly. Sometimes you really need to get there quickly. And so that's one of the big things we're trying to do. One of the other things I thought of while you guys were talking was for a long time in bass, there's this concept of how low can you go. And so the volume aspect is just, well, I'm a bass player, so I'm going to go to the bass control and I'm going to turn the bass knob. And, that works well in places, maybe reggae most effectively. And there's other styles, but there's also this level of sort of subtlety and taste and appropriateness in band environments where you can win the game by understanding where the low point of the low is that is tasteful to make a band, an ensemble, sort of glue together. I love the bumper sticker that says everybody follows the bass player, right? Because you really do drive and sort of tie the whole thing together. So whether it's a bass control on your instrument or it's a bass control on the amp, I think it's a great concept to not be stuck on, let's see just how much this thing has. And maybe a better way of thinking about it is let's see the amount of bass that's necessary to fill up the room and have that frequency come back to you so that you get a real-time feeling of what's working in a space. Bass is historically difficult, I think, maybe one of the more difficult instruments to move into a new room every day and get the same feeling that you had, particularly the louder it gets. And again, I think for upright players, it's just tricky in general because you may not be being loud, but there's so many different resonances that happen right at your instrument and from your amplifier. And a lot of times you're probably trying to be subtle. So they're tricky, and it's worth spending time learning the controls on your instrument. And then a lot of people, I think, a lot of bass players have a tendency to lean on their tone controls, bass controls, treble controls, mid controls on their instruments. Because you can get there while you're playing. You can make adjustments. You can walk over to the other side of the stage and say, oh, you know, wow, I can't hear myself. I'm going to go with some more mid-range and see if I can cut through in the mix a little bit or something like that. The controls on the amp can do a lot of that same thing, but they're also different. So you'll get crossover. And I guess the other thing I would say is that I think there's a lot of really amazing interplay that can happen between the tone controls on your instrument and the tone controls on your amp, and it can be really fun to explore that. If you're in the midst of a gig and you have to play, well, you know, get your tone and get going and play that gig, but if you're sitting around, tone can be really inspiring. And so it's one of those things where, you know, you'll be spending that time with your instrument almost regardless. But when you're amplified, it's really interesting to learn the interplay between the controls on your instrument and the controls on your amp. Lots of times you might have more or less advanced controls on your bass or your amp. So that's another thing to sort of understand. I don't know if we'll get to stuff like parametric EQs or semi-parametric EQs or shelving controls. I don't know if we want to go to that level, because that could cause some eyes to roll back in people's heads. So I guess maybe this is a good time to open it up for some questions too about amplifiers or.
This isn't about amplifiers, but can you talk about like the strings you use and how that influences your sound when you're playing?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Move up to the players.
I have Zon strings on my Zon bass. And why I'm using those is, you guys know I'm a double bass player. I like to have some resistance. I don't want things to be too, I like my action a little bit higher, and I like to feel something to fight against. Not like a fight to the death, like where I'm miserable, but I like to feel something pull against me. And I feel really happy about these strings for that reason. I'm able to get a lyrical sound from them and still feel enough tension that there's something pulling back.
There's a difference in strings too. You've got nickel strings and stainless strings. And nickel strings tend to have a warmer, rounded tone, where stainless are typically a brighter, more sparkling sounding string. And Daryl Anders from Dunlop Weinster makes strings, and if you had particular questions about strings, Daryl could really get into the deep into the windings with you on the strings if you had questions.
I guess well, maybe like one last question with the strings. The gauges that you guys use. I know, Michael, you're big into the alternate tuning thing, and I'm kind of starting to get into it myself. You know, I typically do like, you know, standard, like, you know, a whole step or two whole steps and so on and so forth. Like, what's the, like, how thick do you get, you know, as far as strings are concerned, you know, when you want to tune down?
Yeah, I like light gauge strings. I think I like the way they sound, I like the way they feel, and I like the fact that I can tune them all over the place and they don't mind. So for me that works, but I would say it's mostly a matter of personal taste. I have noticed, contrary to conventional wisdom, that light gauge strings seem to have more low end than heavy gauge strings. I have not done the empirical research, but just from my experience, it's kind of interesting. You take a small string and tune it way down, it has a massive amount of low end.
Yeah, the one you had before, the one that had the piccolo strings, what gauge were those?
I think it's
50, 40, 50, 40, 30, 20.
Yeah, 50, maybe 52, 42, 32, 20, something like that. Yeah.
Is the lowest on that like a low D, or does it go lower sometimes?
Yeah, I tune it all the way down to E flat, below standard. So
We've got, those piccolo strings are available on our website in our store. You go to zonguitars.com, our stores, we've got piccolo strings that we go. So